The NFL is the ultimate what have you done for me lately league, and every player and team had expectations entering the 2024 NFL season. Some were, of course, higher than others, and some have played well beyond the expectations they had entering the year nearly 4 months ago, but others have not. Whether it was due to poor performance, injuries, or the team simply letting them down, there were several players and teams that, more often than not, failed to live up to expectations in 2024, and in today's video we will be discussing 4 of the biggest losers from the 2024 NFL season. With a title like this, it is important to note that each of these teams and players had certain levels of expectations and unfortunately failed to reach those once lofty expectations they had. It's not a personal attack, of course, as there's only so many teams that can go above 500, and there's only so many teams that can get to the postseason, and they are all competing at the highest level for a reason. But there are several players and situations we are going to dive into in today's video, and without further ado, let's begin. And we are starting today's video with the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins entered the 2024 season with some questions to answer, as they were coming off of a terrible end to their 2023 season, as in the final few games of the year, they were beat 56-19 by the Ravens, 21-14 with the division on the line against the Bills in Week 18, and then 26-7 to the Chiefs in the wild card round. They started the 2024 season 1-0 with a 20-17 win over the Jags, but even within that game, I wasn't all that impressed with the Dolphins' performance because there was a lot that had to go right just for them to beat the Jags. The biggest part of this game was Travis Etienne fumbling near the goal line as the Jags were about to go up by 3 scores to make it a 24-7 game. He fumbled, the Dolphins recovered, and on the very next play, Tua hit Tyreek Hill for an 80-yard touchdown, and a 24-7 Jags lead turned into a 17-14 Jags lead at the snap of a finger. Miami eventually won 20-17 on a 52-yard game winner from Jason Sanders, and good teams find ways to win games, but that's certainly not sustainable, and the Dolphins season quickly changed when Tua got hurt against the Bills in Week 2. But what absolutely needs to be remembered is the game was long over before Tua got hurt. Buffalo did not squeak out a 13-10 victory and started making plays once Tua went down. No, this was a beatdown in a game where Buffalo won by 21 points, and then unfortunately Tua went down. He came back in Week 7 against the Cardinals, in which Miami lost 28-27, in a game they blew a double-digit lead, and in one of the few games Marvin Harrison Jr. legitimately looked good in 2024. Sure, you can make the argument that the Dolphins beat the Titans in Week 4 with Tua, and I do think they would have, but the Dolphins entered the 2024 season with several holes on their roster, and we will break all of this down and discuss a long-term plan for them this offseason, but I never understood what their intentions were entering the 2024 regular season. They lost guard Robert Hunt in free agency to the Panthers, who signed a $100 million contract, and I get it. The Panthers were in a very desperate situation with Bryce Young, and they had to do anything to get better, even if that meant slightly overpaying for a player. Miami was never going to match that offer, and Robert Hunt was not going to get a 9-figure contract from anybody else, so he did what any normal person would do in that situation. He set himself and his family up for generations, and good for him, truly. Unfortunately, the Dolphins had center Connor Williams go down late in the 2023 season to an ACL tear, and he was never re-signed. He was a free agent and did not sign with the Seahawks until August. Now, Williams retired pretty abruptly in November, but they had 2 positions to fulfill along the interior offensive line, and just said, we are going to roll the dice with Liam Eichenberg at right guard and Robert Jones at left guard and effectively hope for the best. And not surprisingly, the results have not been good. Neither player is good, and there's a reason the Dolphins' reputation of being soft is what it is. Technically, they can still make the playoffs as they went from 2-6 to 8-8, but does it matter? No. If they get to the postseason as a 7 seed, they are playing 60 more minutes of football than the other 18 teams who did not make the playoffs. I question a lot of things about the Dolphins, and one of them was their plan heading into the 2024 offseason in terms of what they would want to do up front along the offensive line. Their entire offense is predicated on the offensive line being at least adequate, and there's a reason they are 31st in yards per carry in 2024, and there's also a reason they do not beat good teams outside of one 23-15 win against the Rams on Monday night. This team has a long way back, and they are one of the biggest losers from the 2024 NFL season. Next up is Joe Burrow and ultimately Jamar Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals, and this one is pretty clear. Through 16 games, Joe Burrow has over 420 completions, over 4,600 passing yards, 42 passing touchdowns, all on just 8 interceptions. And Jamar Chase has over 115 receptions, over 1,600 yards, and 16 receiving touchdowns, and will win the Triple Crown for the first time since Cooper Kupp did it back in 2021. And we discussed this last week, but there's only been 3 Triple Crown winners in the past 20 years, which was Steve Smith back in 2005, Cooper Kupp, like we just said, in 21, and Jamar Chase this year. And for each player to really be dominating the way they are and to ultimately not have the team success, unfortunately puts them in today's video, because this is an ultimate MVP caliber season from Joe Burrow, and it's not an exaggeration to say this is the best football he's played of his career. But unfortunately, the defense has let them down time and time again, and I think really the summarization of the frustration of the 2024 Bengals was the 3-game stretch between weeks 10 and 13, in which they lost to the Ravens 35-34, in which Jamar Chase had an all-time game as he had over 260 yards and 3 touchdowns on Thursday night for everyone in the nation to see, only to fall 1 point short. They then lost to the Chargers 34-27 the following week. They then had a week 12 bye, and then after the week 12 bye, they lost to the Steelers 44-38, and within that game, the Bengals defense allowed over 500 yards of opposing offense, and the Bengals fell to 4-8. I think everybody kind of just assumed the Bengals were done at that point, as 8 losses in a season is really difficult to get into the postseason, because like we've seen over the past couple of weeks, the Bengals need a lot of help, and at this point, they can get into the postseason, but again, after they suffered that 8th loss to the Steelers, they needed a lot of help, and this should have been a year of celebration, and this should have been a year of great times and fun times, and not, hey, let's look up at the scoreboard after 60 minutes and see Joe Burrow throw for 400 yards and 4 touchdowns and see that the other team outscored us because our defense could not make a singular stop when it mattered, or they couldn't make a singular stop in the second half, and that's ultimately why we include Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase in today's video. T. Higgins has also missed some time, and he also has double-digit touchdowns, and T is in a contract year, and he's certainly earned himself a lot of money this season, and I think there's a very real chance that T. Higgins will be getting paid $30 million or more in 2025, and whether that's on the Bengals or not is to be determined, but this trio should have had the opportunity, if it is the final year of these 3 playing together, to have a legit opportunity to walk off as division champions and to go to the 2nd Super Bowl in 5 years, or 4 years together, because Jamar was drafted in 21, whereas Joe and T were drafted both in 2020. And I don't think anybody would really trust the Bengals defense at this point to hold 3 elite AFC offenses in back-to-back-to-back weeks. Whether it would be going to Buffalo, whether it would be going to Baltimore or Kansas City, that would be an extremely tall task for anybody, let alone the Cincinnati Bengals defense, which has let them down time and time again. But there's also a reality where Joe Burrow and the Bengals beat the Steelers in Week 18, and there's a good chance that Joe Burrow throws for 3 touchdowns, maybe even 4 touchdowns based on the level he's playing, and he finishes the 2024 season with 45 or 46 passing touchdowns to single-digit interceptions, and he's not even going to be in the MVP conversation because unfortunately it is a narrative-driven award, and there's a lot of team results that have to play into that, and for Joe to not even be considered, despite definitely playing at an MVP level throughout the entire season, unfortunately puts him in today's video for all the wrong reasons. Next up is Garrett Wilson of the Jets, and this is for several reasons. We did a video recently on the most disappointing teams in 2024, and the Jets were, of course, included in that for several reasons. Whether it was Woody Johnson getting too involved as the owner, or the poor on-field play, which recently culminated in a 40-14 loss to the Bills, it's been a long season for the Jets, and more specifically, Garrett Wilson. Wilson is a very good receiver, and I think I am a little bit higher on Wilson than other football fans, admittedly, but I legitimately think he can be a 1,300 or even 1,400 yard receiver in the right situation. Unfortunately for Wilson, he's had the first 3 years of his career effectively wasted, as in 2022 he was being thrown passes by Zach Wilson, Mike White, and Joe Flacco. Wilson still went for over 1,100 yards and won the Offensive Rookie of the Year, and for what it's worth, Sauce Gardner won the Defensive Rookie of the Year, and the Jets' future, especially with the 2022 draft class that featured Wilson and Sauce, as well as Breece Hall and Jermaine Johnson looked legitimately bright. 2023 was unfortunate for everyone in the Jets organization, as their season was effectively over after 4 plays, but Wilson still had over 1,000 yards despite another bad quarterback situation. He was still productive, and no big deal because he's only 24, and now we have a 4-time league MVP and a future Hall of Famer throwing him passes, and surely he will blossom into the player we think he can be. But it didn't work out like that, and now I think we are at a point where the first 3 years of his career have effectively been thrown away, and now there's rumors from Ian Rappaport that Garrett Wilson could request a trade if Aaron Rodgers remains the Jets quarterback in 2025. And from Garrett Wilson's perspective, I don't know how you could feel any other way. He has 3 1,000-yard seasons to start his career, and what you may not know about Garrett Wilson is he's never missed a game. Obviously, the Jets have had a couple of really long years, and the starter players on the Jets have had every reason to check out, especially during the month of December, when they've been out of the playoff race for 6 or 8 weeks of the year. But the Jets are just 18-32 since drafting Garrett Wilson number 10 overall back in the 2022 draft, and I'll be honest, I really feel for him because he has done nothing but put his head down and work since becoming a Jet, and despite all of the outside noise and the reality show in 2024 and all of the tough losses this team has suffered, there's nothing to show for Wilson really except for empty stats. The only thing you can really argue that Garrett Wilson has put up since becoming a Jet is numbers towards his career legacy, and obviously that's great for him personally, but entering the 2024 season, this was supposed to be the year, not just for the Jets of course, but for Garrett Wilson. I legitimately thought he would be in the Offensive Player of the Year conversation, as I didn't think a 105 reception, 1,400 yard, 12 touchdown season was out of the equation for him. Not only that, but I thought his catch percentage would go up a tremendous amount from his first 2 years to his 3rd year, and it did, as he only caught about 56.5% of his targets in the first 2 years, not due to him of course, but rather due to his quarterbacks, and in 2024 his catch percentage went all the way up over 65%. But when you look at the situation now, there's a 24-year-old receiver who is clearly fed up with the situation, and a guy who feels he's giving everything he has, and at the end of the day, for what? And unfortunately, Garrett Wilson is one of the biggest losers from the 2024 NFL season. Next up is the Atlanta Falcons, and before we really dive into the Falcons as to why they're in today's video, one thing I do want to clarify is this is not just going to be a couple of minutes of dunking on Kirk Cousins and bringing up his numbers over his last 5 starts, which were 1 passing touchdown to 9 interceptions, and then to translate them to a full 17-game season and say, well, Kirk would have thrown 3 touchdowns to 31 interceptions, and how could this team sign him coming off of a torn Achilles and all of that? And this is not what that segment is going to be. And in fact, I ultimately respect the Falcons for really pushing their chips to the center of the table and saying, we are sick of going 7-10. We are sick of beating the absolute worst teams in the league while not being close to beating the good teams in the league, and we want to change that. We want to move on from the days of Desmond Ridder and Taylor Heineke and a 39-year-old Matt Ryan, or however old he was, and you get the point. That is a decision I will always respect when a team chooses to go all in with what they think is a problem solver. Unfortunately, Kirk couldn't get the job done, and we are now in the Michael Penix era, and it happens. Free agent signings don't work out every year, and there's going to be big free agent signings in the 2025 class that don't work out, and a year from now, we are going to be saying, how could this team not have seen that prior to this signing? And it's a little different with Kirk coming off of a torn Achilles, but we are mainly discussing the Falcons because the defense they had entering the year was not good, and there were a lot of questions that I had surrounding this defense prior to the 2024 season starting, with or without Kirk Cousins. The pass rush has been a big one for the Falcons, not just for a year or two, but really all the way back, going back to John Abraham, and that was a problem that I had with this team entering the season. Saying to Arnold Ebiketie, Caden Ellis, David Onyemata, and a 30-plus-year-old Grady Jarrett at this stage in his career, and basically saying, all right guys, carry us to a division title and win us multiple playoff games, was always going to be a tall task, and there's a reason that teams select pass rushers really high in the draft, and there's a reason once they get that said pass rusher that a lot of the time they don't let them leave the building, and it's because they know how vital a good pass rusher is to an organization, and there's a reason the Falcons are not high in the NFL in pressures, nor are they high in sacks, and their current leading sack getter has 6 on the year, and we are 16 games into the season to give you an idea of how bad their defense is. What's also frustrating is Raheem Morris was brought in to improve the defense, and I will say in Raheem's defense that, like we just said, the overall talent on the Falcons defense isn't all that that, and there's only so much Raheem can do. But even if he schemed a perfect game every single week, I still don't think the Falcons defense would be all that good, because again, the players on this defense outside of Jesse Bates and really AJ Terrell and a couple of others isn't all that good. And that's a big reason why I include the Falcons in today's video. Is you look at what a team like the Minnesota Vikings did this offseason by bringing in guys like Andrew Van Ginkel, Blake Cashman, and Jonathan Grenard, and basically say, well, what could we have done with the $45 million we paid Kirk Cousins when we knew we were probably going to be drafting Michael Penix? Because let's just call this what it is. Terry Fontenot did not walk into the draft room that night and say, you know what, I want Michael Penix all of a sudden. This was a conversation that they had long before they ever signed Kirk Cousins, and they chose to pay the quarterback and then ultimately draft the quarterback. Now, again, I do respect the decision to go after Kirk Cousins, but that also limited what you were able to do with a defensive roster that, again, talent-wise was already bad. And that's one of the big reasons that we include the Falcons in today's video. The Falcons are also in a very tricky situation with Raheem Morris, because I'll be honest, I don't think he is the answer, and I think the way that the clock was handled at the end of the Washington game in Week 17 is a prime example as to why I don't think he's the long-term guy. And I think there's going to be a lot of conversations this offseason about, well, Raheem didn't exactly do a bad job in year one, but he also didn't do a great job, so we're going to keep him around for year two and beyond of the Michael Penix era. And I know Caleb Williams and the Bears have obviously got a lot of heat with the way that that situation was handled, and rightfully so, with Matt Eberflus and Shane Waldron and everybody else. But I really think the Falcons are in a similar situation with Raheem Morris and with how this situation is probably going to be handled, because I don't think he should be the long-term head coach. I don't think Raheem Morris is awful, but I certainly don't think he's ever going to be a Super Bowl champion head coach or a guy that leads this team to a Super Bowl appearance. So for all of those reasons, the Falcons are in today's video, and with that being said, I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as we recently had 175,000 subs, and I cannot thank you guys enough for the support. And until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.